right, and we are live. How is it going, everybody? I see we already have quite a few people watching. I'm really excited about tonight. We have two really special guests. I think everybody knows the name Spears Munsil. And if you don't know it, you should know it, and you're going to learn why tonight. So really awesome to have them joining us, and big shout out to Sue Toscano for helping to set this up. So thank you so much. Couple quick house cleaning things before we dive into tonight's episode. We are giving away this AOC HDMI 2.1 cable on avnirvana.com. And believe it or not, if you went onto the internet and tried to buy this, it would cost you $1,799, which just sounds utterly ridiculous, but that's what this cable is selling for. This is going to be the first cable tested as part of HDMI Test Bench. Last week, we released a review of a wireless HDMI kit. That was our very first episode of HDMI Test Bench. So check out our YouTube channel to see how that one fared. But Fiber, they offered to give us two cables, one as a giveaway and one to test. So we are giving this one away. If you'd like to enter that contest, go to avnirvana.com. And enter right there. You'll see it on our homepage today. It should be on the homepage for a few more days, and that contest runs for a couple of months. Also, tonight we have a giveaway that we're going to try to do during the show. If we have between 10 and 20 viewers going at any one time in about 20 minutes, we are going to do a drawing for a free copy of the brand new Spears and Munsil Ultra HD benchmark disc, and compliments of Jason over at Scenic Labs, or sorry, Media Light. Jason, I know you're watching right now. You're probably going to kill me. But over at Media Light, who is the official distributor of this disc, he's also tossing in an LX1 bias lighting kit. And Jason joined me, I'd say about a year ago on AV Nirvana Live, and we dug very deep into bias light kits and why you should have one with your television. It's totally fascinating stuff. So doesn't matter where you live in the world, you can win the new disc and a lighting kit. So please stick around, and hopefully we will be able to draw a winner tonight. And if we can't, we'll take it over to our website and we'll draw a winner in the next couple days. Okay, so enough of that business. Let's get down to what everybody has come to watch tonight, and that is our special guests, Stacey Spears and Don Munsil. And I just wanted to introduce them briefly. They, I'd say, kind of not having known them, they're kind of mysterious. I mean, you see their names on these legendary discs, and everybody knows about these discs. But let me tell you a little bit about them. They first met about 23 years ago while they were working at Microsoft, and they struck up a really good friendship, bonding over just a love of movies and a passion to get the best possible presentation of movies on a TV. After years of calibration on testing, or writing about calibration and testing and various video equipment, they created the first HD benchmark disc, and that was in 2008. That's probably a disc that a lot of you know. I know I own a copy myself. When they're not creating test patterns, Don is an avid stereoscopic photographer, and he owns mousesavers.com. So definitely go check that out. I think that is a Disney deals site, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure Don can tell us that in a second. And Stacey is a senior principal engineer at Red, and he spends his off hours perfecting his car detailing game. So let me bring them on. Gentlemen, how's it going?
Hi, great.
It's going well, yeah.
Butchered the intro just a little bit there, but
well, luckily it's not live. We can redo it right and edit it.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's really great to have you guys here. I know a lot of folks out there are interested to hear what you have to say about this disc that I know you've been waiting to release this for a long time, and there's been rumors. I think the first time I heard about it coming out was a little bit over a year ago at the Value Electronics Flat Panel Shootout. in New York City. I believe Jason Dustle was there, and he said he thought it was coming really soon. And it sounds like there were some delays, and for good reason. I mean, you guys have really been pushing the outer edge of what discs can do.
So we showed the first cut of it, the Value Electronics Shootout the year before that, in October of 2021.
That's probably where
we thought it was going to be out then, and then of course we thought it would be out by the next shootout, and it wasn't. And so, yes, basically it was a challenge to author. We'll leave it at that for now. I mean, David spent an enormous amount of time trying to work around trouble with the authoring software. For example, normally you create one project per disk. Well, the first disk is made up of, I think, somewhere between 7 and 9 different projects, and then merged together. And fingers crossed it worked. And interestingly enough, the person that wrote the tool that put it together, that created the actual image, is in Ukraine. And so we were a little concerned we wouldn't actually get it done.
Wow. Really? Is he still online?
He's still online, yeah. Well, the person in Ukraine is still around, so.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. Yeah.
Every time we do one of these discs, Stacey, always starts the process by saying, okay, this time, no compromises. We're going to get everything on that we absolutely want. And we always we fill up one disc and we're like, maybe we should stop here. And no, it's, we keep thinking, okay, there's one more thing we can add, and then we'll go to a second disc, and then we'll be like, well, maybe we could add that whole set of patterns we talked about before. And
well, what's interesting is on my local hard drive, everything on the first disk plus the skin tone content on the second disk all fit within 100 gigabytes. But it turns out the block size or whatever on a disk is different. So our smallest files were actually bigger than they needed to be because of a minimum size.
Wow.
And that spread us across more than one disk.
Right. And I mean, this release is roughly, I believe, 260 plus gigs. Is that correct?
Yeah, the first 2 discs are basically full. In fact, we sort of went, we went beyond what you normally do on a one disc. They like to leave a little buffer room to keep you away from the edges of the disc, but we actually ended up getting closer to that. And the second disc is just about full. The third disc might have a little bit of room left. We might have an extra 10 gigabytes we could have put on there.
Wow. So a lot of information, and that equates to a ton of files. Let me bring up this right here, because this is information that really hasn't been out in the public until today. Sue passed this along to me, and I found it fascinating. Just that top one right there, the new disc has roughly 5,000 files. And
that's the encoded video and audio files, not counting all the authoring stuff that goes with it that make up a disc.
Wow. Totally incredible. I mean, basically almost 4 times more.
Well, and a lot of it's duplicate, though, because you've got to have a version for Dolby Vision, a version for HDR10 Plus, and 6 different versions for HDR10 because of all the combinations. And then on the SDR disc, there was a 709 and a 2020 SDR.
Right. Right. And just so everyone knows, the HDR version of these patterns and everything, that is on disc 1, correct?
All but the skin tone content and 2 extra patterns we did at the last minute because we're always adding more.
Yep. So and those fall on disc 2.
Those fall on disc 2.
Yep. And then the SDR falls onto disc 3, which oddly enough is kind of the first disc that you suggest everybody reach for.
Well, the SDR disc is also the disc with all the audio tones on it because we couldn't fit them on the first disc. And in that case, it didn't matter if the video was HDR or SDR because the actual audio calibration is not impacted by that outside of AV Sync.
We have a viewer who's asking if there is a reason why you guys are not on Kaleidoscape, or are there any plans?
So if Kaleidoscape could actually import the disc and play the discs as a disc, absolutely. The problem is I don't think they can, and we'd have to produce 5,000 files. And the other thing is a lot of our static patterns are only a few frames long. So in the case of something like a Kaleidoscape, we'd have to increase them to 1 minute long so that you can loop them, play them longer and pause.
Right. And yeah, to your point, Kaleidoscape is not taking discs from studios and ripping them into their system. That's a completely different process that they're going through. It does beg the question, though. I mean, you guys, we're getting close to the end of discs Potentially. I mean, probably not in the next decade, but at some point here that will end. I mean, have you thought about what's next?
So people want files on USB stick, for example. The problem there is there's no copy protection, so it's easily to share. But more than that, so for example, on LG, it actually will maintain your menu structure. So you could build a menu on a USB stick and organize the patterns that way. But on a Sony display, it actually gets rid of the menu structure and throws everything on screen at once. So it's just a huge mess of files.
Right.
So managing all those files is sort of difficult. And also, with the current disk, with all those static, short frame files, it took 3 months of machine time just to encode those. So to increase them to a minute each, it's going to take a lot longer to encode.
Okay.
We've also talked about putting some of the basic patterns on streaming services and so forth. We've had some conversations about that. It's tricky. We could put a few key things together, but to put all of this stuff, it starts to mushroom, the sheer amount of work involved. Eventually, we'll have to figure out something. But
because there's nothing for 8K, should 8K become very popular in the home.
Right.
Well, and you're talking about work. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about yesterday is the sheer amount of work that you guys have put into this disc, because to the layperson, they may look at this and say, oh, well, they took some, graphics art program and just threw all this together. But that's not really the case.
One of the things we did different on this disc than our others is the encoding. So normally we would just choose the highest quality settings. We'd force the lowest quantization to get the best quality. But through some accident, I found that on certain patterns, changing certain encoder settings changed the quality on one pattern, but not another. So I think I came up with 96 different settings, and I encoded every test pattern 96 times. And then each pattern I chose the best compression for that pattern. So it was a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure. And Don, you had stressed that, you use dithering. Would you like to talk a little bit about that or describe that to folks?
Sure. I mean, this is just an example of the kind of detail that we try to put into these discs, is that when you're trying to create, say, a window pattern or some sort of a target pattern where you're going to be measuring it with a light meter or a spectral radiometer, if it's designed to show you a specific code value, right, like an encoded value, no problem. I can show you a code value 220 and it will be exact. But if I want to show you, say, 35% brightness in linear light, there is no code value that is exactly 35% brightness. You can pick the code value that is closest, and now you're going to be at like 34.6% or 35.2%. But by using dither, we can actually create a window that measures at exactly 35%. And I mean, is that going to make a massive difference to most uses of the pattern? It doesn't make a massive difference, but it does make a difference. And I think it's, we can't really not do a pattern that's more precise if we know a way to do it. Our feeling is this is what you want from your test equipment and your test patterns, is you want some people that are super, super precise and super anal about doing things exactly right. So we developed our own dither algorithms. We, it's all designed to get any particular patch of the window to measure exactly right. And, for it to look good on the screen, not look like there's some kind of dither pattern that's visible. So there are invisible dither patterns in essentially anything that is supposed to be measured in the linear light. And I can go into more detail.
It's also not just standard dither, right? It's air diffusion with dither.
Right. Yeah. I could go into more detail. Stacey is constantly telling me, don't go into so much detail.
Well, I mean, it just drives home that it's extremely complicated, right?
It is. The upshot is that you can trust that if there's a pattern that's supposed to measure at a specific light level, it will measure at that specific light level. not close to it, not nearly that level, but to the precision that we can possibly get it. If you aim your light meter at the screen, you can guarantee that patch is exactly the percentage we say it is. And that's important to us. And there's other things like that. The anti-aliasing on all the lines. Like, we tried using some off-the-shelf software and we didn't feel like the anti-aliasing was right. We actually measured the anti-aliasing. This is where anti-aliasing is where you use different gray levels to make an edge look smooth and not stair-stepped. And we measured some of what various software was doing, and we said, no, this isn't right. This is not. They're not using the right levels. It's better than it looking like a stair step, but it's not perfect. So we wrote our own software to generate any diagonal lines or circles or anything on the disc where it will look more like reality, like you shot. We're generating lines and we want it to look like you aimed a camera at some lines painted on a test card. And in order to do that, we had to essentially build a physical model of what the line looks like and generate that in a physical linear space.
And one of the reasons we spent so much time on compression is dither and high frequency detail and the anti-aliasing are the first things that compression wants to throw away or quantize. So spend a lot of time just trying to preserve that detail.
Absolutely, yeah. Because the compression algorithms are designed to make things look visibly correct. But your eye, is not as discerning as test equipment. So it can throw away detail that you really can't see, at least not with the naked eye directly. But but for testing purposes, we need it to really
be mathematically correct,
on the exact value. We were the first test disc to have, I think we may still be the only test disc to have a working monotonicity pattern, because we came up with a whole new way of generating a monotonicity, which we were told by...
Avi had one, but it was Luma only.
Right. Well, with Luma, you could always do one, but we've done color, monotonicity. And monotonicity is where you're showing every possible value of a particular color. So every value of red, from the lowest to the highest. And we were told by multiple people that this was not possible because of the way and the nature of YCBCR encoding, you can't represent exactly solid red at every possible level. It always rounds down or it rounds up, and you end up with gaps in the sequence. And we said, well, that's not acceptable. So we figured out a way to do it. And involving sort of tricking the MPEG decoder into generating the exact right red value by manipulating the blue and green values so that they are below reference black, which also turned into an interesting test pattern, because we found that occasionally a decoder would end up putting garbage on the screen because it wasn't supposed to be paying attention to those values below reference on the blue and green, but sometimes they would, or sometimes they'd clamp those before doing the color space conversion.
Interesting.
Right. So if you clamp after the color space conversion to RGB, you're okay. But if you clamp before, then you'll end up with, like on the color space eval pattern, there's these two color gradients, and those will have this undulation artifact in it if you clamp at the wrong time.
Yeah. So it ended up creating a whole new test pattern. In addition to monotonicity, it also tests whether people are clamping the YCBCR channels prematurely.
Do you guys want to take a stab at this? Can you see that question?
So on some patterns, yes. So on the monotonicity pattern, if you take the uncompressed source, the compressed source, and then decompress it, they will be mathematically equal. Basically, if you do like a PSNR, it'll be infinite or lossless. But not every test pattern is lossless. Like a zone plate, for example, you can't compress all those values.
Well, you can compress them, you just don't get back the original value.
Right. Now, there is a lossless version of the codec. It's just Blu-ray doesn't support it. And not every decoder supports every profile of every compression scheme. So
there again, I mean, that shows how technical this can get. And one of the things that I liked about this release is that you guys are catering to the super techie crowd, but also to the enthusiast crowd. That might
Hopefully.
not really have a clue about calibration, right?
We're trying to build something that we want and hope others would want it too.
But we do want it to be useful and accessible to people who don't have a lot of background in video. It's tricky to create something that works for both groups, and we keep, each time we release a new disc, we take into account the feedback. We always get feedback from people who say, basically, I bought this and I don't know what to do with it. Like I got it and it's got all these patterns and they're all sort of interesting to look at, but what are they telling me? And in some cases, that's kind of like there's a limit to what we can do with some of the patterns, because some of the patterns were really designed for professional calibrators. And just describing what this pattern is for ends up being, you could write a whole long essay about one specific pattern. So for the stuff for professional calibrators, we sort of tried to sequester that stuff and try to give you some idea that, like, well, if you're really into video, that's what this stuff is for. And, you can, if you want to do a deep dive on the research and so forth, you can do that. But we also wanted to make sure that there was stuff that had very clear, straightforward instructions of this is what you can do with this. This is what this is for. And here's how you make use of it. And I think we did an okay job of describing that in a previous disc, but it wasn't as good as it could be. And I think in this disc, I think we've moved, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but we really tried hard to incorporate all the feedback from people who said, I still don't understand, or this is still very complicated. I really need it to be broken down step by step. And so the booklet that's in there, the whole first section of it is really just a guide to, like, what is this for? What can I do with this? What's the value I'm going to get out of it? Hopefully that makes a difference for people.
Well, the first and second, we kind of spoiled people with the first and second disc because they had the pop-up help. And then the last disc did not have the help. But there are various reasons for that. In fact, we knew the last disc didn't have help and it didn't have audio, and people were going to be mad. And they were mad.
Well, it's funny because when we were promoting tonight, I had at least 5 or 6 people say, well, I'm interested in the new disc, but I'm not going to know how to use it, because I think their first experience was with the last disc. So,
well, and the disc also is meant to cover, it actually covers multiple people, multiple groups. So in a perfect world, we would design a disc just for the enthusiast who doesn't have any gear, and that would literally be the video setup menu. Then if you added the calibrator, it'd be the video setup menu plus the analysis, which has all the window patterns. And if you were a reviewer, then or a display manufacturer, you have the advanced video. Problem is, authoring each of these discs gets expensive, and it's cost prohibitive for us. So instead we throw everything on a single disc, and then you have groups of people who are kind of frustrated because they don't know how to use everything on the disc.
Yeah, for sure. Well, folks out there, rest assured, if you don't know a lot about this stuff, the disc set comes with a booklet that's very informative. I mean, hats off to you guys. I mean, you went right down to connecting how to, connect the Blu-ray player directly to the TV, take things out of the signal path, settings on your TV, right down to specific manufacturers, which is really helpful, because we all know that when you get into menu systems of various manufacturers, it's just like, a free-for-all of terms.
It's menus at this time frame. Obviously, a couple of years from now, the menus will change, and then you look at the disc going, well, that's not right, but it's all we can do.
Well, yeah, right enough to get people kind of going in the right direction, I think.
And also, we were limited by the number of pages that Sony could print when they replicate. So we actually sort of went beyond what they allow, and they kind of wanted to use thinner paper, but we kept the thicker paper. So fitting the booklet in the case plus the blue filter in the case, it's all, very compact.
Yeah, it's nice to see the blue filter back also, I think. I know that, it's not exact.
So, what you don't know is that we actually, after the last disc, I think Don went out and bought every filter gel he could find. In fact, we tested filters that were $80 each that did worse than that plastic filter.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then we actually tried to also mix filters, because filters gives you their cutoff curve. And so we tried to mix them that would do the same thing, and it still didn't work. So we spent a lot of time on filters.
That's right.
It's people. I mean, what we discovered with the last disc is that people expect the filter. They expect the filter, and we're trying to explain to people that on modern TVs, really the filter is not. It's not doing you a lot of good. But I don't know. There's something very tangible about this blue filter.
Oh,
and it's only used on one pattern too, out of the 5,000. So.
Yeah, and one pattern that we basically don't recommend you you use.
I did think that was funny in your instruction book. You do say like probably want to just leave this one alone, but
well, even on the last disc, I think Jason, because of the feedback, started selling the filter. But we're like, look, this filter probably won't work. If you buy it, there will be no refunds. We do not recommend you buy it, and people still bought it. So
that's
if
great.
if they had proof they had the disc, they got the filter very cheap. But if they had no proof of the disc, then they charged a lot for the pirates.
I mean, in a sense, we're proud of the filter. We think it's the best
Yeah.
filter that anybody's ever made. And if you do have an old CRT television, this filter is the best one that you could possibly get for a CRT television. It will work great.
Yeah, because typically a filter you get might have 2 layers of filter gel and that's it. So we've got one side with 1 layer, one side with 2, and you can fold it and have 3. But even on my Sony Z9D with 9 layers of filter, it's still not enough.
Yeah.
And it gets very dark.
Wow. There you go.
And I think
it's just that on modern TVs, the spectrum actually of the actual pixels is pretty, it's pretty broad. Everybody's got these high dynamic range, high gamut displays, and then they've got, in addition, there's a CMS in the chain. And once you put a CMS in, the filter just really doesn't work anymore. It's not that it's not physically correct. It's that the television is doing all this processing that means that this idea of checking the color, the color setting and the tint setting, it no longer makes any sense to have a color or tint setting with modern digital video. It was an artifact of analog video where, a television station is broadcasting a color signal, and their transmitter, as it warms up, would actually, and all their other equipment, as it warms up, the tubes get warm and like the color slowly drifts. And you've got to constantly bring it back into calibration. So there'd be technicians who every hour or so would be going in and pulling up a color bars pattern and pushing the blue only button on the monitor and then adjusting and dialing in the color settings. And then at home, you had to do the same thing because your television is warming up and the tubes are getting warm and the color is shifting. Well, with digital video, there is none of that. There's no analog.
But there is creative intent of the display manufacturer to make things look different.
Right. But these days, when the display manufacturers do creative things to make their displays look different, it's very rarely something that you could correct with the tint or color control. It's not like they're goosing the color control. They're doing something else. And so for legacy reasons, they typically have a color and tint control in their TV, but everybody in the industry knows it's no longer relevant. It's just one of those things that SMPTE says it should be there. You put it in there.
And when SMPTE designed the HD color bars and the HDR color bars, they actually removed the capability to check tint because they're like, tint doesn't exist anymore. We're not even going to show you how to correct it. Which is why we still include the original SD SMPTE bars just in HD and HDR, or UHD and HDR.
Yeah, we did put in the work to do a very nice color and tint calibration pattern, which again, if you have a CRT TV, between our filter and our color and tint calibration pattern, you could do a great job. Just on a modern TV, it's no longer as relevant.
Right, and there it is.
Yeah, and the one thing we did do is we wrote up instructions to tell you if the filter is going to work or not, because no one has ever told you if you can verify your filter is working. They just show you how to use the filter.
Yeah.
And that's what the bars on the left are for. So if you see any of those colors bleeding through instead of a solid set of color, then the filter's not working.
Well, it should look black. Yeah. When you look through the filter, the whole left side of the screen, that whatever that is, Jamaican flag or whatever, should look black because the filter should be filtering out the entire thing. And if it doesn't, then the filter's not going to work. So there's no point in continuing. On some displays, you actually can put up the filter and you'll see that it's black or so close as to be immaterial. Like you don't see any bleed through of that color. And in that case, you can go ahead and look on the right and get everything to match.
Mm-hmm.
Now, previous discs, we didn't flicker, but then we had a lot of feedback saying we want it to flicker. So this version flickers, but if you go into the advanced menu, evaluation color, then we have non-flicker versions as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Or you could also just pause on this one, but that may put up an on-screen logo or something.
Because there are people with CRT TVs out there. It's amazing, but they do still exist. So
now Samsung, I think, may be the only manufacturer that still has a red, green, blue only mode, and that actually works.
Yeah, it will work if you have a blue only mode. But all the manufacturers that have a blue only mode, they've got the color intent dialed in at the factory. So, I mean, it's useful to sort of check and say, yep, it's correct. And then you can move on. But
at least in the right picture modes, they have it set correct. Because they will have, for example, if you're in a cinema type mode.
Yeah.
That's going to be correct. But if you're in the blowout vivid screen.
Yeah.
Right? Vivid sports. Yeah.
Everything's, yeah. And
which,
of course,
don't do it. don't use those modes.
So one thing I do want to point out about the pop-up help, there's two. So with 4K Blu-ray, they really did the minimum amount of work to get 4K Blu-ray out. So the menu system is actually HD and it's SDR. So it's scaled up by the player and it's converted to HDR, which means we can't actually show you HDR examples because you can't do HDR in the menu.
Okay. So, and for folks out there, I have a remote control right here. You just press on the down arrow on these various patterns and boom, there you go.
So if you use the first or second edition, it was the up arrow, but on the last disc, the up arrow is the configuration screen to switch between formats.
Right. Which you can see right there. So on the fly, which is really cool, on the fly, you can change these settings.
So if anybody wants to actually compare Dolby Vision or HDR10 Plus to HDR10, you want to set HDR10 to 10,000. That way they're all using the same version. Because some patterns actually change based on the nit level, and some patterns are the same with just different metadata.
There you go.
So color intent, for example, it's the same pattern at all nit levels, but something like color space evaluation actually changes based on the nit level. And then the HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision are all based on 10,000 because they're dynamic metadata. They don't have static metadata like HDR10 does.
Now, you guys suggest, though, that your average user is going to be hitting this at 1,000 nits.
Yeah, if you're using HDR10, start at 1,000. It's a good starting point. Mm-hmm. We're starting to get displays now that go beyond that, but it's still 1,000 is a good baseline to start with. Mostly because a lot of movies are graded on a Sony BVM, and those are all 1,000 nit grading monitors.
Okay. Awesome. Well, hold on one second. Let's pause. We're bouncing around between 15 and 20 live viewers at any one time here. So let's do our giveaway drawing. I'm going to say we're going to go old school here. Like back in the day when we used to listen to the radio and they'd say caller number 7, you win. So
you want to try something complicated?
I'm going to go complicated. So in the chat, if you're watching, I'm going to say the fourth person to type in LX1, you will be the winner. The fourth person that comes up in chat. And let's see what happens. Maybe no one, maybe this won't work, but
well, to show you how much video geeks we are, every disc has been priced at video frame rates. And most people don't notice that. Now, we did steal that idea from Charles Poynton because he did the same thing with his books, but
that's funny. Yeah, and that caught me off guard the first time I saw the price, the $59 price. I was like, okay, that's a little strange. Okay, Supernova, you are the winner. So hit me up at my email, todd@avnirvana.com, and we'll get you hooked up with all of that stuff. Thanks for watching. So guys, I think I had mentioned to you the other day that on this first disc, I thought that, you guys are including the bias light pattern, which I doubt is going to show up in here because of how bright it is. Yep. And you can't see it.
So but we actually worked with Alan Brown on this pattern from Ideal Loom back in the day on the second edition to come up with the sort of zigzaggy pattern in the background and stuff.
Right. And so basically what you can't see here is a rectangle in the middle of the screen. It is very dim. It's not so bright. And you want to match your bias light approximately to what you're seeing on the screen, correct?
Yeah. And so in this version for HDR, I think they did a bunch of research and they thought 4.5 nits was the right setting, but generating 4.5 nits is more complicated for a lot of people. So everyone moved to 5 nits. And so that particular pattern is at 5 nits.
Okay. Color space evaluation. You guys only had one version of that in the previous disc, correct?
Correct. So HFR stands for high frame rate, which is just a quick way to put 5994, because if I had to write 5994 or I had to write 60, I say 60 for shorthand, but then people don't know if that's 60 or 5994, so I just went HFR. Don's not a big fan of that, but anyway, so we've got the normal 4K 24 version, UHD 24. Then we've got a UHD 60 version, and then we have an HD 24. And the reason we did that, in fact, at least through the camera, see how the blue gradients on your screen do you see like steps in it? I see it through the camera, but I don't know if you can see that on your screen.
I cannot see it with the naked eye.
Okay, good.
No.
So that,
at least from this angle,
that means it's either
I'm at off angle.
the camera capturing or do you have the HDR optimizer on your player by any chance?
No, it's turned off.
Okay. So then it's definitely this capture system, because that should be a smooth gradient. But when you see steps like that, it usually means it clipped in YCBCR before conversion to RGB.
Okay.
Anyways, where I was going with that, sorry. So we made different versions this time. So we found out that a lot of Blu-ray players, if you convert to 60p, they can't do 10-bit. They have to drop to 8-bit. So we wanted this pattern to check for that. And then the HD version was similar for other reasons, just to look for scaling artifacts.
Okay.
Which is why we added 3 versions this time around.
Which I believe we can get to the HD version. It's kind of cool to get from pattern to pattern. You use the left and right arrow keys. You can just zip around on the discs. So there we go.
And we should point out that the primary use case for this pattern is that, people have all these settings on their TVs now. A lot of them are off on, but there are some other settings as well. And we really wanted to have one pattern that would help cover all of these various settings and give you some idea of like, are you in the right gamma setting? Do you have, when you turn on and off different kinds of processing, what does it do to the picture? So this pattern combines a ton of different evaluation pieces that if there's some kind of processing that's damaging the image, often one of these components will demonstrate it. You'll see some difference, something will get brighter or darker. We've got the things that show chroma mismatch, chroma luma mismatch in the center. We've got various things that can show ringing, that can show
right. So if we look in the center, the blue and red, we call those chroma diamonds. That is checking for YC delay, as is the red stripe on the yellow background. At the very top in the center, we see the blinking bars. If that's completely smooth and you don't see any blinking, that means it's tracking gamma and SDR or ST2084 and HDR. It's tracking correctly. The upper left chroma,
and you wouldn't expect that to work on a camera. Like that's based on a perceptual effect that that's a pattern that we came up with for visual verification of gamma tracking.
The upper left and upper right chroma patterns with the little zone plate and the horizontal, vertical, and diagonal lines, that was to look for the chroma bug. And those are non-RGB legal chroma patterns. And then the bottom, you have RGB legal versions of those patterns. And then you've got that color space section where you've got the green and the red. If those little squares are equal, that means color conversion is correct. If they're not equal, it's wrong. But then with HDR, tone mapping can get in the way of that one. So it works really well in SDR and it works well in Dolby Vision. HDR10 on some displays, depending on tone or gamma mapping, it kind of breaks it.
So this is more advanced use than what your general user is going to be.
Yeah, but it gives us everything we want to look at on a single pattern. And one of Jason's ideas, which we didn't get to on this disc, because he actually also wanted to use this pattern as a menu in a way. So for example, if you moved a cursor over the zone plate in the upper left, you pushed enter, it would take you to the full screen version of that pattern.
Oh, interesting.
So it's something we thought about doing, but we never got to. Sorry, Jason.
We have a question. It says in the case notes, or the case notes that the SL HDR2 format is used. What is that?
SL8. So you probably heard of Dolby Vision, HDR10 plus HDR10. Well, there's another HDR format that's involved with Technicolor and Philips called SL HDR2 or Advanced HDR by Technicolor. So one of the montages was done in that format, and Philips Technicolor actually did that work for us. Now, no Blu-ray player supports it, so we're the only disc that has shipped with it, but you can't actually use it. And in fact, and not all displays support it. So like the LG C9 supports it, but newer LGs no longer support it. But if you were to rip the file off the disk, plug it on a USB stick into an LG C9, it would go into HDR, advanced HDR by Technicolor mode. But we wanted to include all the available HDR formats that the Blu-ray offers.
Okay.
And
Now
Blu-ray,
something else. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say there's only one mandatory format on Blu-ray, and that's HDR10. Everything else is optional, which is why no players support it that we're aware of.
Do you think that's coming down the road?
Probably not.
But it's there just in case.
It's there, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is where it stores the metadata, what's called an SCI message in HEV in the compression, it uses the same location that HDR10 Plus would use. So you can't do both in the same encoded file, whereas you can do Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus on the same file because they store the metadata differently. Just an interesting note.
Okay.
One of the things that we are constantly up against is that there's this whole chicken and egg problem with different formats and different encodings and things like that, where if nobody's ever encoded a sample in a particular format, then nobody will support it. So we will sometimes put something on the disk that, is legal, technically legal, but we don't know of an example of it being anywhere else. And the hope is that this will help jumpstart people actually making use of this format. Maybe, at least, here's an example. It's encoded. It's on a disk. It works. If somebody does want to support, HDR by Technicolor, here's a disk. It's got the format on it. So we've done this with a few other things here and there where, we've got the whole SDR in 2020, we've got all these patterns in 2020 SDR. Now, 2020 SDR is legal.
So the backstory there, sorry to interrupt.
No.
So originally UHD was supposed to be 2020. The problem is the first 4K displays only supported 709. So when a particular streaming service launched 4K, they used 709 because 2020 didn't exist on that display. So everyone sort of went 709. But the original expectation was all UHD resolution would be 2020.
Okay. And I'm assuming most people are going to be using Rec 709.
Right.
In SDR, correct?
Yeah.
I just popped that disk in, so hopefully we'll get a glimpse of that in a second. Now, talking about some of these little hidden gems, and I know this is out on the net, people are talking about it, but you guys in your manual, you make reference to something about the Dolby Vision analysis test pattern, but you guys want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, so no, that's slightly different. So the Dolby Vision analysis is the relative, absolute, and perceptual modes used for calibrating Dolby Vision. You're thinking of the Dolby Vision quality check pattern.
Correct.
Yeah, so it basically tells you if Dolby Vision is working correctly or not. So in what's
one
called
specific aspect of Dolby Vision.
Yeah, so there's Oppo calls it player-led versus TV-led, but it's really the player does the decoding or the display does the decoding of Dolby Vision. And in the player case, one of the controls is being ignored. And so this pattern shows you if that control is being ignored. Basically, anybody, like we make extensive use, or Dolby, when they graded our content, made extensive use of that picture control. And if you actually ignore that setting, it changes the picture on screen. So for example, on the last disc, the eagle's beak was green if that control was ignored, and it was yellow if it was correct. And there are lots of examples on the last disc like that.
Okay.
But it's not supposed to be ignored. It was a bug that has not been fixed. So we put the pattern on there for reviewers to look at in hopes that reviewers would start reporting this, would then hopefully put pressure on Dolby to fix it.
Okay.
We haven't exposed it to everyone because there are certain cases where you have to know when it's going to work and when it's not going to work. And I'll give you an example. On the LG display, in cinema mode, it will work correctly. In cinema home, it will not. And the reason is in cinema mode, it's going to use the version of Dolby that's on the disc, which is 2.9. But in cinema home, in order to take advantage of Dolby IQ, which does that brightness adjust based on your ambient light, it has to convert the 2.9 into 4.0. And they changed the behavior of that control in 4.0 to not act like that. So
basically, you don't want a bunch of people out there not knowing what they're doing and
freaking out.
And freaking out. Yeah. Causing a stir. Now, quick question about that. if a player has an error, does it still show up as Dolby Vision if you're watching a movie that's encoded in Dolby Vision? Does the TV think that it's?
Oh, it goes into Dolby Vision mode. So, are you familiar with Dolby Vision Trim Pass?
No.
So, for those that might not be, so with Dolby Vision, you not only have dynamic metadata. So a colorist might grade the movie on the Pulsar, which is a 4,000 nit grading monitor. They'll make all their creative choices at 4,000 nits, but then they have these special controls called trim pass controls. Think of it as additional color grading controls that they can do at different nit levels. So they can now test at predefined levels, which are 600, 1,000, and 2,000 nits. And they can watch each one of those and make adjustments to tweak the tone mapping. So instead of just relying on the dynamic tone mapping to do the right thing, they can actually tweak it, see it before the content's ever released. So that way, when you get it, if you only have a 600 nit display, you'll still see what they intended. The problem is one of those particular trim pass controls is being ignored. And that then changes the look of the film to a way that wasn't intended.
So you may think that you're watching something in Dolby Vision. In fact, you're not.
And in fact, there are actual artifacts, little noises that jump around or banding that occurs. There's at least, if you look at our previous montage, because we toned it back down with the newer one so it wouldn't be as obvious. But with the old one, if it's not working correctly, there are a lot of artifacts in the image. And they could say, oh, wow, Dolby Vision looks terrible compared to HDR10 when it's really just a bug. So in a way, we're trying to help Dolby. With that stick.
It's curious.
I'm sure Dolby sees it that way. Yeah.
Do you have any insight as to why that's something that hasn't been corrected?
I think it's Blu-rays, like as you mentioned earlier, disc is sort of not as big as it used to be with streaming, so it's less important, I think.
Yeah, it's less. Yeah, makes
Although
sense.
someone the other day thought they had made a comment about how they thought discs were coming back, and so they actually went out and started purchasing more discs, mostly because I think they were getting discs. With a disc, you get a constant experience. With streaming, your bandwidth can change, and it will actually change the quality of what you're watching on the fly.
Right.
Certainly, if you want the highest quality possible, you really want discs to,
Right. So a streaming service today might give you 15 megabit per second 4K, whereas our montages are all around 90 megabits per second. So we're using a much higher bit rate.
I think it really comes down to convenience versus quality.
Yes.
And unfortunately, convenience seems to win out in a lot of these cases.
So years ago, when the original Xbox came out, my brother had bought the original Xbox and he bought a Toshiba TV that had component video in. So I went over, I set it all up. Fast forward the next year for Christmas, I'm home watching TV at his house and I'm like, why is there cross color? And I looked and he'd switch it to composite video because he didn't want to have to switch inputs on his TV. He wanted to press one button on his AVR.
Oh, of course.
Convenience went out over quality. So I'm like, you can't be related to me. You can't tell anybody.
Yes.
That's hilarious. Awesome. In terms of the audio test that you guys have on the discs, there's a lot more available for folks now.
Did you want to go back to the disc so we can kind of talk about some of it, or you
had
it on
the wrong one?
Well, you're on the demonstration disc now. Maybe we can start with skin tones and go back to audio.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let's do skin tones.
One of the things people always asked for was demonstration material to show skin tones, and so this was something. And we actually shot this on February 29th, so it was a leap year. Had we waited one more week due to COVID lockdowns, we wouldn't have captured any of this. And so we've got as many models as we can get at the last minute since COVID.
Wow.
But one thing I like about this is in the test chart behind them, the color checker chart, in the lower left corner, the brightest chip, that should measure somewhere between 132 and 134 nits. If you turn dynamic tone mapping on some displays, they actually bump things up and that measures over 200 nits, which breaks creative intent. So it's a nice little test to have in the test.
Very cool.
But every model has makeup on their face. So you get makeup on their face, but then on their necks and shoulders, there's no makeup. So you kind of get a view of skins with and without makeup. And also the light source directly on them, the key light is a D65, but off to the right, kind of highlighting the side of their face as well as the bolt on the color checker chart is actually a different color light source because we wanted to see what mixed lighting would look like on their face as well.
What kind of light is that?
I think it was more around 3,200 kelvins instead of 6,500.
Okay.
And so if they turn their head, you'll see you'll see the warm tone versus the cool tone.
There, you can see that in her hair.
Yeah, exactly.
On the left side there. So it's a much warmer light. Yeah, these are great. I mean, the past discs only had static images.
And then the
Correct.
back wall is actually a gradient as well. We lit it from the floor up to produce a gradient. So if a display has banding, you'll actually see banding in the back wall. So everything on this pattern is below 200 nits, except for usually like pings off their ear ring or the little bolt on holding the color checker chart. Those are closer to 800 nits, but everything else is below 200.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, for folks who are purchasing this disc set to dial in their TV and they don't have a whole lot of skills beyond that, this is something that you want them going to and checking when they're all finished, correct? Looking at skin tone to make sure they look natural.
Skin tones are one of the key memory colors. People notice when skin tones look wrong. And these are not designed to look extra ruddy or extra saturated. They should look like fairly natural skin tones, or what you're used to from taking videos or selfies or whatever. You know, like they should look natural. They shouldn't look odd. And basically, if all these skin tones look like, you know, like a skin tone of an actual person, then that's a good indication that things are dialed in pretty well, that you haven't, you know, messed anything up.
Right.
We tried to get as many different skin tones as possible, but even here where we have 4 Caucasian women, they all have very different skin tones.
Right.
I mean, there's an endless number of skin tones, so you're really limited to what you could do.
Right. And folks at home, what you're seeing on your screen right now, is not even close to what I can see on the television. I know it doesn't look super great, but keep that in mind while you're viewing this. We have a question. Any tests that projector owners should pay special attention to?
Well, the geometry patterns for sure.
If you have like a 239 screen, then something like either the aspect ratio patterns or the framing pattern, especially if you've got a masking system.
Well, not to mention that just putting up any of the geometry pattern, just put up the 16:9 geometry pattern and actually measure with an actual, you know, tape measure the horizontal and vertical circles and squares, and make sure that you're not getting any distortion, that your projector. We sometimes find that if somebody has a projector and they're using the digital keystone adjustment, that it will do subtle things to the geometry. And you just want to verify that, you know, especially if your projector is mounted slightly off axis or something along those lines, that you're not getting some kind of distortion of the geometry. It also, certain patterns will show if you don't have a perfectly flat screen, you'll be able to see the distortions, although, you know,
so you
probably know if you don't have a perfectly flat screen.
So we have a new pattern on the disc. It's called variable checkerboard. And the reason it exists, it's an evaluation pattern, and we created it for LCOS displays. So we noticed a long time ago on an LCOS display, they can't resolve single pixel checkerboards on and off. So we were curious at what if it's just at single pixel or if it's different sizes. So it's a pattern where it starts off in the center on one version where it's a big checker, big steps of white and black. And then as you go horizontal and vertical, they get smaller and smaller, and by the corners, and it's it can be hard on the eyes, the pattern. If you want to show it here, it's very interesting.
Which
it's under advanced video evaluation, and so you have variable checkerboard and you have an inverted version. So the regular one has the single pixels on the outside, and the inverted has it on the inside. So It should be down towards the bottom.
Yeah. Try staring at that for an hour in a dark room.
And then if you press the right arrow and go to the next one, like I said, it inverts the direction of it. So the center is single pixel and it gets bigger towards the edges. And if you stare at it too long, it will imprint on your eye, and it will take a while before it goes away because you will see it everywhere.
Okay.
There's even a color version of this, but I think we do all 6 colors at once in a different section, in the color section.
Yeah, it's interesting right now. Showing up on the camera, you can see purple, but it's actually a black and white static image.
Probably a demosaic artifact.
Yep. AV Sync. Is that the... let's see. Let's get over there.
Oh, so we did expand AV Sync on this disc. On the previous disc, I think we only had AV Sync for UHD 24. this time we have it for 24 and 60, as well as UHD and HD, because any of those things could actually increase the latency. So it's very, and then of course we also have it in all the HDR formats, as well as Dolby and DTS. So we try to give you lots of different combinations this time.
Okay. And you guys, previously your AV sync was one test, correct?
It was, well, you had continuous side by side in sync 1, but it was all Ultra HD 23976 only. So
Gotcha.
1 frame rate and 1 resolution. But we realized that scaling can introduce a delay, and different frame rates might have different delay. So it's all there to take up lots of time.
Yeah, that's a really helpful thing to have, because if you have sync issues, it can drive you nuts trying to line that up. In terms of the other audio, advanced audio,
that's on disc 3.
Disc 3.
Yeah. So while you're loading disc 3, so one of the things we worked with Dolby and an audio mixer on this. So Mark Fishman does audio for a living, and he also had a contact at Dolby. So Mark did the original. He created what's called a DAMP. It's the master file for Atmos. And then we gave that to Dolby, and Dolby used a special internal encoder. We originally used Dolby's commercial encoder, but Dolby informed us that they had released a new version of the Atmos renderer. So depending on if you have a sound bar or TV, an AVR, surround processor, you might be using version 1 or version 2 of Dolby Atmos. And there's slightly different differences between them. And so they actually they helped us create these so that they'll produce the same levels on both. So anyone else creating Atmos tests today, you're probably, unless you worked with Dolby, you're not going to have the same levels on both.
Right. Boy, that really casts a broad net.
So go ahead and click on base layer for a second. So we default to 7.1.4, and we also either show you only the base level speakers or the height level speakers at any one time. So in this case, it's the 7.1.4 scenario. In fact, earlier today on a forum, someone said, hey, you didn't include the wide speakers. Well, if you go to the configuration menu and you select 9.1, then the wides will show up. We wanted to kind of limit to what speakers you have within the, the ones available. And in this case, instead of having pop-up help, the help's on the left side of the screen.
Yes.
And so you use the right arrow to go clockwise, left arrow go counterclockwise between all the speakers.
So you can move around your room. This is for channel leveling your speakers.
And then how do you change Atmos? What's the controls to change the Atmos setup? You have
to go to the configuration menu.
Oh, right.
Because it impacts. Yeah. So go to configuration, which is the default menu you start on. So you would, select then. So in this case, go ahead and change base layer to 9.1.
9.1.
And then
go back over to audio.
Go back over to audio. And play base layer again. And now you've got your wides.
Now you have your wides. Now what brought along the rattle test?
That was a last minute addition. And I think so Roger Dressler, who used to work at Dolby, also helped a lot. In fact, the base management was his idea. I forget who I was talking to, but they're like, you really need a rattle test. Because if you go back to Avia had a rattle test. And I think Digital Video Essentials has a rattle test. Now, we only did it in the center channel because we made the assumption that if any speaker is going to be small, it's going to be the center speaker. So that should be enough.
For sure. Yeah, right. To make sure the sub is being used.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's useful, if you play that and you listen around your room and you see something's rattling, maybe a picture on the wall's rattling, then you put something underneath it to dampen it. And
can you pause the frequency?
No, it's always cycling.
It's continuous.
Yeah.
I guess you can always use Room EQ Wizard or something and just play a constant tone if you once you kind of figure out what the general area is.
So with previous discs, with just standard 5.1 and 7.1, it's really easy to create all kinds of different versions. With Atmos, it's hard because you need Pro Tools and you need a complete setup to create what's called a DAMP, which I think is Dolby Atmos master file, I guess. I don't know. So in this case, Mark had to actually create every single one of these.
Okay.
So yes, if we go back to the menu to answer this person's question, go up to panning. So we've got circular pans. We've got a pan that just circles the base layer, a pan that circles the top layer, and one that cycles between the two. And same thing with diagonals: top front to rear right, top front left to rear right left, and then the front left to the right rear surround, where it'll actually go up and then back down.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's a very slow pan,
Yes.
also, which you don't frequently get, right? When you're watching a movie, usually it's something that's happening quickly, so it's hard to really judge
Now
how painless the pan is.
Brian created these in After Effects, and After Effects, it kind of struggles in some ways with 3D. So we don't have a shadow on the ground, which would have been really nice, but it was just sort of difficult to make. But we still got this little, panning ball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a huge feature to have access to, just from an enthusiast perspective, because a lot of people want to test out their setup, and there aren't that many tools out there to really let you do something just like that.
Well, so Chuck from Trinov had tested this for us, and he's got this elaborate Atmos setup. And even after doing all their calibrations, he used our panning test, and he still found a slight difference he was able to adjust out. Where as he was panning, it got slightly louder in one spot. So we were happy with that.
Yeah, that's saying something for Chuck.
And although Trinov, of course, has a brand new system, I think, coming out, at least they showed it at one of the shows. So I don't know if it's available yet, which should further improve their auto calibration, because it's pretty extensive.
Yeah, the firmware update.
Yeah, I don't know if
I think it was released about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, yeah, because they had demonstrated their new room correction stuff at one of the shows recently. But
yes.
So if you want to go, for example, go to the base level that does the top and bottom panning. Yeah, base and top. And so it starts off at 5 seconds in the front left speaker, and then it slowly works its way around. And so in the panning ones, we physically took the speakers out because we don't know where your speaker's at, and it could cause confusion. So we just have the little ball panning.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And so this is where the drop shadow would have helped a lot, because it's kind of hard to tell, but it really is in the right spot in 3D space.
Yeah, I think that, well, yeah, right there would have helped as it's transitioning, but because you have the couch there, you can tell. Right.
But I thought I was really happy with Brian's work on these patterns.
Yeah.
The video of them. And Mark's work.
Excellent.
And a lot of these were actually Mark's idea in terms of the panning he wanted.
And this is right here, folks, what you're seeing is just indicative of how awesome these discs are, because they're so thorough.
Yeah, and we're not audio people, so our first disc and our third disc had no audio on it because we didn't want to do audio unless we could really get it right. And so even our pink noise, we originally worked with John Dahl when he was at THX, because our goal was to match the pink noise of a THX processor.
Mm-hmm.
Because you had some processors that would do -75, some would do -85, some would use white noise, some would use pink noise, and we wanted to get it right. And this is where Roger Dressler came in and even tweaked the levels further on this one to make sure they were correct.
Yeah, this is a fantastic add-on to have. So guys, we're butting up on an hour here, and I was hoping to kind of close things up at an hour, but I'd like to ask you,
sure,
if you guys can give some advice to, your average enthusiast out there who will be purchasing these discs. What really should they be aiming for, and how should they get there?
Well, I think first we should give a warning. As we like to say, ignorance.
Yeah, this is a great way to sell discs. Warning.
Well, yeah. Well, or what we discussed before was, if you really are excited to buy something new, use this to show your partner something's wrong with your system and how you have to have that new system.
Exactly.
Yes, if you're an enthusiast, obviously you want to buy new equipment. And so our disc will really help you find all the flaws in your existing equipment, which will help justify, getting that new system you've been wanting.
That's right.
I would say
you get a lot of those. Hey, get in here! Did you see that? Did you see that?
in all seriousness, I think what you want to get out of it is knowledge. Like you want to know. I'm always curious. What are all these settings in my TV and my display and my player menus, my processor? What do they really do? And we feel like with the patterns that are on this disk, you don't even have to get into the super advanced patterns, just the evaluation patterns. You can make changes in your system and run through a handful of different patterns. The color space evaluation is always a good starting point, and change settings and see what happens. Like as you change sharpness, you will see stuff happen. And you can start to ask yourself, what is this doing for me? What is this doing to this pattern? What are the changes? What changes first? As I start to increase it more, what changes more? You really, I think, in the end, should have a pretty decent idea of what these different settings on your TV are doing to the image, and which ones of them you should turn off, which is probably all of them, but you never can tell. I mean, we often say, oh, turn everything off, put it in cinema mode, put it in the least, have the television do the least processing and the least, stepping on your image possible. But that's not always actually true. Like, sharpness is a perfect example of something that is really a perceptual setting, and you don't want it turned all the way down because every television manufacturer implements sharpness differently. And on some TVs, if you turn sharpness all the way down, you're blurring the image. Like, you're actually making the image worse. What is the setting that actually produces the best picture? That is going to vary depending on how big your screen is, where you're sitting, what's the resolution, what's the light level, how good is your visual acuity? Have you gotten glasses recently or not? So you need to actually look at it, change the settings, look at what happens, and really get a feel for what's going on. So hopefully by the time you go through our description in the booklet and really look at these patterns and look at all the settings on your TV, you should feel confident that you really do have your TV set with the right settings. The right things are turned off, the right things are turned on. You have an idea of what the different things are doing to the picture. I think that's what you should look to get out of it, is that by the end of it, you'll know more, and you'll also feel confident that your TV's set up right.
And using sharpness as an example, being perceptual, and Don talking about vision, there's a case where at your viewing position, you might want to set sharpness. You might set it where you can barely see the artifacts at your viewing position, whereas you might go up to the screen and they might be more egregious, but you're not watching with your nose to the screen. You're watching from your seating position. And in the case of projection, some technologies are softer than others, so you use sharpness to compensate for some of that. So you may find artifacts on the sharpness pattern, but you actually might find that pleasing on real content. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's sharpness is good, really. I mean, sharpness helps make images pop. So you do want a sharp, clear, crisp image. And since sharpness is to a great degree a perceptual artifact, like there is no magic perfect setting for sharpness. There's no SMPTE standard for sharpness. And I find that on modern TVs, I know this LG I use at home has basically 3, maybe 4 settings. I'd have to go look in the menus that are some form of specialty sharpness. And our sharpness pattern is very useful for trying all of those and seeing what they do. When you turn this up, you find, oh, these get these little ringing artifacts around it, but these other things don't, because each of them is kind of a selective, more sophisticated form of sharpening. And, by playing around with those different settings and seeing what they do and how they affect the image, using a sharpness pattern, using a color space evaluation pattern, you can really start to answer questions about what's going to look right for you. And then you can go and look at the montage and feel like, if this looks crisp and clean and everything is popping off the screen, you've got it right,
And actually, can you bring up the sharpness pattern? So every time we do a new disc, we tend to modify existing patterns if we can improve them. And this version of the sharpness pattern actually has some new elements on it. We added some like 2T steps, or rise time. So normally our sharpness pattern is single pixel transitions. Some people, argue that single pixel is not realistic. So we added some new transitions that actually have softer edges that are worth looking at.
Let's see here.
That's under video setup. Oh yeah, yes. So when we develop the disc and test it, it's all off hard drive, which is almost instantaneous. So when we actually have to put a disc in a player, we're like, what's wrong? Why is it taking so long? Let me grab lunch while it's loading. Although we tried to load the disk as fast as possible, which is why we don't put FBI warnings and forced trailers or anything else. It's straight to the menu.
Yeah, for a disk, it's pretty quick to get to where you want to go. Okay, so there we go.
And like with Dolby Vision, every time you go from a pattern to the menu, it takes such a long time to sync, which is why the right and left arrows work so much better. Once you get to the pattern, you stay in there and just use the arrow keys.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you had mentioned that you guys did something different here with the sharpness pattern. So what specifically are we looking at?
Can you put it up so we can all see it?
Oh, you can't see it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I'm sitting here staring at it. There we go.
So if just outside the circle, you'll see those horizontal, vertical, black and white lines. I think there's 3 steps. There's a T step, which is instantaneous. I think a 1T and a 2T, or a 2 and a 3T. I forget now, but and those, instead of having instant edges like all the other lines are instantaneous, there's actually a slight blur to it, like a slight roll off, to basically be a more natural transition you would see in real video. So just some additional elements. So those should ring, not have as much ringing, or take longer before ringing occurs.
I'll also point out that the circular and the diagonals, those are anti-alias. Those are examples of where we wrote our own code to generate the anti-aliasing, and those have a much more natural roll off, like a real camera image as well. So if you want, the things that I always look at the most when I'm looking at the sharpness pattern are the circles and the diagonal lines. Those are the things that I think reveal artifacts that you're going to notice on diagonals and so forth. I am going to look at all the other, vertical and horizontal lines and so forth. And there's some checkerboards embedded, aren't there, on this
you can see
version of the pattern? Yeah,
you can kind of see it on the left. So when you're looking at it in person, those should be invisible, basically, from your viewing position. As you start to turn sharpness up, they become visible.
Yeah. And you'll see different things appear at different times, as you turn sharpness up. I always tell people, turn sharpness all the way down and turn it all the way up. You're going to need to set it at something that's aesthetically correct for you at your seating position. There's no problem with just see the whole range. In fact, if you've got multiple, edge enhancement or other enhancement modes on your television, turn them all the way up. And you should see some artifacts. I've never seen a television where, with sharpness and all the edge enhancements all the way up, you will see visible artifacts, especially if you walk up to the screen, you can look at them. And then that gives you some idea of, what I'm looking for. This is what this is the unnatural thing that I want to avoid. Then you start dialing sharpness down until the lines now look sharp but natural. You don't see extra echoes and ripples and stuff that aren't there. You don't see other artifacts that you don't want to see. But first, look at the artifacts. This is
So I do want to point out that purple thing that tells you your TV is working correctly. If you don't see that purple dot on your TV at home, that means it's not working.
That's right. That right there. That's what you show your spouse or your significant other and say, "Hey, we need to go get a new TV."
Yeah. Now the purple is just the light in the studio reflecting on the TV.
Yeah. That's right.
So I've never seen sharpness crush blacks on my OLED.
Huh. I don't know what that's. I don't know what's going on with that. Sharpness setting effect brightness pattern on my OLED. It crushes blacks.
Which OLED do you have? That would be good to know. Then if we can track down that OLED, we can actually test it ourselves and see what's happening.
Because sharpness, LG OLED, it looks like.
Sharpness should not have any impact on
black level. Yeah.
Assuming we're talking the normal sharpness control, one of their enhancement controls, maybe, but I don't know. I'll take a look.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we get an answer.
We every time we think we've seen every possible weird way that somebody could make their controls work on a TV, we find some new thing. Some manufacturer will have a bright idea, or somebody will introduce a bug. And then, but that's exactly it. I mean, this is when we're trying to figure out what is going on with a TV. Why is this doing this? These are the patterns. Obviously, we turn to our own patterns to try to answer that question.
And so some patterns, of course, are based off industry standard patterns. Some patterns are things we've cooked up based on artifacts we've seen, whether someone's reported it on a forum, through email, or we see it ourselves. We always try to figure out, okay, that's weird. What causes that? And then try to create a pattern to show it, because test patterns are designed to sort of amplify the artifact. It might be more subtle in a real movie, but you want to really call it out, make it stand out so you can see it, track it down.
Here's the answer for you guys.
Okay.
LG CX. EOTF as well.
Wow.
I have a CX I can look at a CX. I don't have one here, but I have one in California. And I can actually ask a friend that used to work at LG if he has any info on that.
Yeah,
All right,
I can't think of any reason why sharpness, changing sharpness, I think that's the straightforward answer. Changing sharpness should not affect your black level. If it is, well, that may be just what we would call a bug. But there's also the possibility that you think it's affecting black level, but it's changing something else. And I don't know.
Of what you're seeing, right?
Actually, if you're talking about, like, for example, we have the EOTF tracking on our color space eval pattern. Sharpness would affect that pattern, but if you're talking about measuring actual windows, then it shouldn't affect those.
Yes, we have that specific pattern is highly sensitive to sharpness because it's basic and scaling and a bunch of other things. But it's useful enough that we keep it, even though if your sharpness is set too high, some of those things won't work quite right.
Yeah, on our EOTF pattern, most likely sharpness would be adding ringing or changing the level of that pixel, altering that pixel, which would then cause that checkerboard to stand out.
All of those patterns are based on the idea of a checkerboard that visually should resolve to something that in linear light is midway between the two levels of that checkerboard. And then we have a gray surround that is the linear light equivalent of the physical average of those two pixels. And in order for that to work, your EOTF has to be correct or close to correct. But in addition, you have to not have any processing that is causing those two colors or those two light levels to be different. And some sharpening algorithms will, in fact, increase the prevalence of white in a checkerboard or increase the prevalence of black in a checkerboard. It'll essentially scale the edges towards black or towards white. They do weird things. It's a strange thing. Most displays, unless you have it set to some crazy high value, doesn't do anything. But every once in a while, we'll see a sharpening algorithm that is just brightening up detail. And conventional sharpening shouldn't do that, but people come up with all sorts of wacky algorithms.
On Sony TVs, even their OLED and their LCDs, the single pixel checkerboard doesn't work because there's some internal processing that is altering the level of those pixels, which breaks the pattern.
Yeah.
So it's not the display technology because they buy the same panels from the same place. So if you compare an LG OLED to a Sony OLED, that particular element of the pattern won't work because of their processing.
I suspect some kind of detail enhancement.
Even when everything's turned off, it's still there. So clearly there's some.
And they didn't put it under control, so you can't turn it off. And
or maybe it's just so buried it's hard to find to turn off.
Well, maybe in the service menus there might be a way to turn it off. I don't know, but certainly from the consumers, if you can turn everything off, it's still there.
Right. One more comment from him, and then.
No, but it's a good discussion. So
it's tough to. It's tough to know without physically having the TV there for you guys to.
Now there is dither in the brightness pattern.
Yeah, but that dither, there's no. If your sharpness is affecting the dither, that's a bug. That's for sure a bug. That shouldn't register as an edge at all.
It's not a
dither
feature.
Is between two nearby values. Sharpness. The whole point is supposed to leave smooth areas smooth. The dithered area should be smooth.
They actually asked about 5 minutes ago this question. So
is it true sharpness on LG OLEDs adds dithering?
I can ask.
I
can ask somebody who would know the answer, but I don't know. I know now LG OLEDs do use dither. They use, certainly use spatial dither, and they added more spatial dither to compensate for this issue where you would see coming out of black, you might see a little bit of flicker where they overdrive the white subpixel to come out of black. And so they added dither to try to hide that. But I don't know if they add it for just sharpness in general.
Yeah, but that shouldn't affect the levels of. I don't. Yeah, I can't think of any reason why it would do that. It would affect those patterns. But, you know, again, we constantly think we've seen it all, and then somebody surprises us with a new, some new kind of processing. Something new that television, all these television manufacturers, they want their televisions to stand out. The more the televisions become a commodity, the harder it is to sell TVs. They really need their TVs when somebody unpacks them and sets them up at Costco to really stand out from the pack. And everybody wants theirs to stand out in a different way.
Sure.
So that's why TVs all come out of the box in torch mode with, these super, super sharpened and super, super neon colors. They've got the saturation turned up and everything turned up so that in a bright, warehouse store or an electronics store, that TV is going to pop as much as possible.
Right.
And of course, you, the consumer who's buying one of these discs, buying our disc, you're going to want to put it in cinema mode and turn off a lot of this processing. And so the fact that it pops in the warehouse store doesn't really tell you very much. It's not, it tells you that it's capable of producing this super highly saturated image, but
and a good time to use our disc is when you're ready to buy a new display. When Don and I first met, we actually went to a local video only, and they let us go into one of their rooms with a bunch of discs, and we spent an hour or two in there testing deinterlacing.
Boy, that is deep into the weeds.
Yeah. But no, if you go to the store and the store will let you actually plug in a player to multiple displays, it's a good way to evaluate the displays and see which one might be the best for you.
Sure. Yeah, and also what you guys are talking about speaks to the fact that when somebody uses your discs to try and get their TV more into a calibrated state, it is going to change the way the image looks, and it is going to look, I don't know if the word dull is correct, but it's not going to pop as much. And when I've helped friends out with their new TVs and we've calibrated them, there is that reaction of, yeah, I kind of liked it better the other way, right?
You've got to set expectations. And in some ways, I think what some calibrators have done is they'll calibrate the display and they'll say, okay, live with it for a week. And after a week, I can, switch back to the other mode after a week and see if you like it. And sometimes if they've spent enough time with it, say a week, then when they switch back, they're like, oh, wow, does this look a little off, But you really need to set your expectations appropriately, because once you calibrate, it will not be nearly as colorful and not nearly as sharp or as bright.
So to end on tonight, once someone uses this disc, we talked about going and looking at the skin tones, right, to get a sense of how well you've done. Is there any other maybe 2 or 3 images on this?
Well, we have the demonstration material. So we created the montage, which is about 8 minutes long. We tried to cover a lot of different content there. And in fact, one of the things we did is we offered that content in every possible format. That's where SL-HDR2 comes. You got Dolby Vision, HDR10 Plus, SDR, HLG. So we have all HDR formats and at different nit levels. And on this version, we've actually added some additional ones. So we give you what's called the HDR analyzer, where you actually get to see the image and video scopes. You can actually see which pixels go above 4,000 nits or hit 10,000 nits, or which ones go outside of 7 or 9, outside of P3.
Awesome. Okay.
And then the graded versus ungraded shows you what the image look like from the camera, and then how much work the colors put into the image to actually give it the final look. We thought those would be interesting and educational.
I would also say that if there's a film that you really love that is not intended to be super ultra day glow colorful, like not The Wizard of Oz, not The Fifth Element, something that involves, it's just sort of a naturalistic drama with real people.
So not Amelie.
Yes, yeah, nothing by Jean-Pierre Jeunet, or pick something that's a drama with real people. One of the things that I think is a real telltale of these torch modes and the really super bright modes that TVs tend to be delivered in is that everybody looks ruddy. Everybody looks like they've just come out of the sun and they've got half a sunburn going. And that's not, there are filmmakers who make people look that way because that's the kind of what they're going for. They want everybody to look like super bright or whatever. But those skin tones are a perfect example. if you're watching, you know, a Vietnam War film or something like that, everybody should not look ruddy. Everybody should look like natural. They should have nice, smooth skin tones, different shades of, you know, pinks and so forth, and browns and tans and things. Everybody shouldn't look glistening. Everybody, you know, like that's what it looked like in the theater. It's not supposed to look like everybody's, you know, just had rouge painted on their face. And that's what it looks like to me when I walk through the Costco, you know, it's like
So
every
not
time you see
Moulin Rouge.
Don, do you have a particular movie or two that you use as reference?
Well, it's usually the next movie that I watch. You know, I mean, this is the kind of thing that I'm just used to. Obviously, you've got to be careful to not you want it to be something that is grounded in reality. So,
well, one of the problems you have is, you know, the colorists will use color to help draw emotion out of you. Maybe they'll make everything sort of more blue or more red just to change your emotion and how you feel. So it's kind of difficult because movies aren't really supposed to reflect real life.
Yeah.
Maybe the news might be a better source, or sports, but newscasters, because they're flooded with light, neutral makeup.
Right. Yeah, but they at least have they tend to have a neutral style makeup. But I think that like modern slice of life dramas would be a perfect example of something where you're unlikely to be desaturated. You know, sometimes these like dystopian science fiction films, they're desaturated in places, they're oversaturated in other places. That's just all for effect. They have
how about Ted Lasso?
Color casts.
It's a very colorful show, but their skin tones are very natural.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. In fact, everything on Apple TV is so beautifully shot. I mean, such high production value.
Yeah, that would be a good example. But I think plenty of Hulu shows would look similar, plenty of Netflix shows. Just something that is a fairly straightforward human drama. Something like White Lotus, for example, you know, for the most part.
That was a gorgeous series.
Yeah, it's a really well shot show, and nobody's supposed to look wildly unnatural, except for maybe the costume choices for Jennifer Coolidge. You know,
yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I think she kind of took things to
a little over the top there, but yeah, and take a look at background actors as well, because there's going to be less attention to them, and that's where you're going to see more natural skin tones. You know, like sometimes the main character is really heavily made up, but if you kind of look at the crowd scenes and you look at all the people and say, you know, do people look like everybody's just come in out of the, you know, out of a sauna or something? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a bad sign typically. And you also, the other two big memory colors, the three colors that people tend to focus on in terms of memory colors are foliage, especially, you know, grass and tree leaves, skin tones, and sky. You know, you should look at those. And of course, again, different filmmakers will do different things to give it, you know, different effects and so forth. But, you know, if you watch a few movies, a few TV shows, you shouldn't feel like everywhere you look, the grass looks like AstroTurf. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it should, you know, the glass should look natural. Trees should look natural. The sky should be a natural shade of blue and not some kind of like hyper saturated blue, which is what you get when you've got your TV in torch mode. Mm-hmm. And then when you do see a movie where the sky looks hyper saturated blue or the grass looks like AstroTurf, you can feel confident that was the filmmaker's intent. That was the point. They wanted it to look like that. Like,
well, so on one of my visits to Dolby, I don't think you were there for this one, but one of the people at Dolby, he's done a lot of sky replacement in his life, and he is very picky. He does not like unnatural skies. I think he would walk by when Shane was working. He's like, "Oh, well, that's wrong. That's not supposed to be that color. The sky is not that color. Fix that."
Yeah, like when the Wizard of Oz goes to Technicolor, everything is supposed to look hyper saturated. Part of the impact is that, you know, everything is like hyper colorful, and it's supposed to be, it's a fantasy, and it was intentionally, even for the time. Technicolor is a very colorful format, but Wizard of Oz, really pushed things a lot. And so everybody looks super colorful, and that's part of the impact. And if everything looks like the Wizard of Oz, then, the Wizard of Oz no longer has impact, because now it just looks like everything else.
Right.
Sure.
It's the norm.
Yeah.
Sure. Awesome. Well, that's some really good advice. Guys, I want to thank you so much it's been an hour and a half. It's been a total thrill to hang out with you guys and hear the backstory of these new discs that are coming out and some of the tips and insights about them. So on behalf of everybody that's been watching, I want to thank you. And
thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. For
sure.
Great to talk about the disc. And, we've been working on this thing for how many years now, Stacey?
4 years.
Yeah.
4 years.
So
right. You said a lot of passion has gone into this, and I've used it for a few days. I know there's so much more to explore in them, but it really does show.
it was supposed to be out a year after the last one, and so we're gonna blame COVID. That's it.
That's it. Yeah. That's
a lot of people do blame COVID, and for good reason, right?
Yes. But it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Yep. And I dropped a link to where you can buy this over in the discussion. And if you don't see that link, I'll put one down in the description when this video saves on YouTube. And aside from that, next week we have Jason Dustle from Meridio is going to be coming on at 6 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday. So Jason and I are going to be talking about the 8K Fox and Hound kit and some other things that Meridio has going on. So until next week, I guess we will see you all soon. All right, guys.
All right.
Okay. All right. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoy content like this, hit like, subscribe, and then join the conversation on avnirvana.com.